tonight's topic is Islam. What do we really know? I don't know if anyone listening or watching, lurking, loving, hating, whatever you're doing, is aware of my position on Islam. Thus far, I have concluded, and which is, it's not set in stone, but I have concluded that Islam is a death cult. A lot of people oppose that idea. A lot of people agree. Some people may not have even explored anything about Islam and don't really want to talk about it, which is fine. That's up to them. But as far as I'm concerned, it's a death cult. And so what I'd like to do, it came up in my recommended, a video, an interview by Winston Marshall, the guy from Mumford & Sons who left or parted ways with Mumford & Sons because they were woke and he didn't want to do woke. And he now has a great YouTube channel that I'll link in the description of this live. And he does interviewing various experts on a multitude of topics. So what I'm going to do is play the interview that's inspired me for tonight's topic, Islam. What do we really know? So without further ado, let's start this video.
The eminent scholar and author Ibn Warraq.
You cannot leave your religion. It's a one-way ticket, You cannot leave Islam without being punished for it. Clearly states, that apostasy is punishable by death. In my less charitable moments, I find that so-called moderate Muslims are really rather dishonest intellectually. They pretend that the real Islam is tolerant, that the real Islam is pro-women, real Islam is for freedom of expression. It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. Islamic slavery was far worse than anything that happened in the West. The Atlantic slave trade. Arabs shipped 17 million black Africans to the Middle East, to the Ottoman Empire, to Arabia. I've been quiet when I should have spoken up.
What held you back? Do you think Islam can be reformed? Hello and welcome to the Winston Marshall Show with me, Winston Marshall. I had the privilege of sitting down with historian, scholar, and author Ibn Warraq. Ibn has been writing about Islam and Muhammad for a long time. We took a deep dive into the history of Islam, the history of Muhammad, the evidence in the scripture, what the truth might be. We looked at previous guests, what they've said on this show. As you've been following, you will have similar questions to me. We also went into Ibn's life, his personal journey, what I think is a very courageous journey, speaking up when few others feel they can. All of that and much more. Before listening, I ask, if you want to support the show, all you have to do is press subscribe. You press the subscribe button, I can have more wonderful, incredible guests like Ibn Warraq discussing the issues you want to hear about. But without further ado, Ibn Warraq. Maybe you can tell me and listeners and what viewers who don't know your story. I think it's quite amazing that you've from India originally. You became one of the preeminent scholars and writers, authors of several books, including Why I'm Not a Muslim, and you live under a pen name of a nom de plume to disguise your identity, as I've understood it, for reasons I'd like to hear about. But maybe you can tell your story from India to where you are now.
Yes, I was born in a city called Rajkot, which is still a part of India. In fact, Gandhi grew up there, although he was not born there. He was Gujarati. He was born on the coast in Porbandar. Anyway, My father was a nominal Muslim. His father persuaded him to leave India and go to the newly created state of Pakistan in 47. So when I was just 1.5, we moved, my family and I, we moved to Karachi, Pakistan. And from there, my father thought there was no real future in this theocratic state like Pakistan, and decided to send it to England. As to say, me and my brother, who was 1.5 years older than I was. And I went to prep school and then to public school in the British sense in England. And I went on to Edinburgh University, where I studied Arabic and Persian, amongst other things. And then I became involved with some secular humanists. I realized I was really an atheist and certainly a humanist. And I got in touch with an organization called the Center for Inquiry, founded by a philosopher, American philosopher called Paul Kurtz. I started writing for them, for their magazine called Free Inquiry. And I wrote an article for them, a short article called Why I'm Not Muslim, because they had been looking for somebody to write something on Islam. They had been writing, they had a series of speakers, writers who wrote Why I'm Not and then a Mormon, Why I'm Not a Jew, Why I'm Not a Methodist, and so on.
Bertrand Russell's famous article, Why I'm Not a Christian.
Calc on his work. They couldn't find anybody to do something on Islam, so I volunteered to do it. And my article turned into a book. So,
why do you think they couldn't find anyone to do it on Islam?
Well, they just were not in touch with many ex-Muslims. They just did not know of any. It was much easier to, obviously in America at the time, it was in the 1990s, to find somebody, from the Christian religion and always offshoots.
Is that because there aren't many Muslim apostates, or is that because?
Well, at the time, this was, I think, around about 1989, I first wrote the article. They just didn't know that many people, many ex-Muslims. In fact, they were not used to having arguments or dialogues with Muslims generally at the time. And when they saw my name in some other journal, I forget what, they chopped at the idea of recruiting me to do this article on Why I'm Not Muslim.
Your turn from, was it more against Islam or is it more towards atheism? Because your writing is very critical of Islam. At that point in your life, what was your spiritual journey? How did you become?
Well, I realized that I was really a skeptic, and my favorite reading by then, I was 18, 19 by then. I think I was married by now. Yeah, I was married, and my favorite authors are people like Gibbon and John Stuart Mill, various secular humanists in America, like Paul Kurtz himself. And I realized that I myself was a skeptic, really, and I was keen to do something for the Islamic side of things. And I had studied, I was not particularly a brilliant student, but I had studied Arabic and so on at Edinburgh University. So I was happy to go back to those educational roots.
Was your interest in Arabic because of your interest in Islam at that point?
When I decided to go to Edinburgh, I wanted to really study European art history. But I had a kind of crisis of identity, and I thought perhaps I'll try and find out a little bit more about Islam and my Islamic identity. That's why I chose Arabic and Islamic studies at Edinburgh, which just happened to. I mean, it's a sheer coincidence, really, in a way. It had a very famous, reputable scholar of Islam, a man called Professor Montgomery Watt, who written a 3-volume biography of Muhammad, the Prophet, which was very positive. I think one of the earliest really positive biographies of Muhammad. This was must have been written in the late 60s, I think. I can't remember the exact dates now. But so, yeah, that was one of the reasons I chose Islam, to get at my roots, my intellectual roots.
Having a crisis of identity at that age is interesting. This is one of the phenomena I think we're seeing in Britain, particularly of second-generation immigrants to Britain, where they don't necessarily feel at home in English culture, so they turn towards their Muslim heritage and to the mosques, and that seems to be one of the crux points of the problems of integration at the moment in Britain. I wonder if you have insight into that. Why do you think you had an identity crisis?
One of the reasons is I wasn't sure that I would really ever be really accepted as an Englishman. I mean, I really, in my head, in my upbringing and so on, up from the age of 10 onwards, I had become an Englishman. I wrote about that in one of my books. When I was, above all, when I was coming back into England from a trip abroad in France, for example, I remember arriving at Dover with I think I still had a Pakistani passport at the time, and being asked, where I was from and so on. And then people later on would say, "Where are you really from?" And I got rather upset at times. And then
Do you think that was on account of your race? Or
because of my looks,
Pakistani?
I didn't look. Yeah, exactly. It was based on looks, essentially. In fact, I remember once when I was studying philosophy afterward at Birkbeck College, I mentioned the fact that I thought Bertrand Russell had a wonderful literary style. And my friend saying to me, "Well, yeah, of course you would notice that, because an Englishman wouldn't notice that. You're being foreigner would notice that."
What a peculiar comment.
It was very odd, and I felt very upset about that as well. So, I mean, if you don't speak well, you're not English. If you speak well, you're speaking too well. No Englishman speaks so correctly, and so on.
So there's a sort of irony then, is that you lent in towards your Muslim heritage because of an identity crisis, not feeling included, or not feeling like English people were necessarily including you as English. And then you come out the other end an atheist. So rejecting
I realized that that I really wasn't a Muslim. That it didn't help me at all going back to my Islamic roots.
So then there must have been a second identity crisis.
Yes, I was happy to acknowledge the fact that I was not a Muslim, and I was happy to write about my acquired Englishness. I was heavily into Englishness of English art, a la Pevsner, and I identified. I used to go to holidays in Norfolk, so the Norwich School of Painters and Artists and so on. I liked the Englishness of painters like Samuel Palmer and Mary Russell. It's the woman who wrote Our Village. Anyway, and
So it resonated with you, this work.
Yes. I felt, Hausmann's poetry, and it was very much. I went to
Huysmans French, though, isn't he?
Hausmann, no, A. Hausmann, no.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I'm thinking.
I meant he wrote about Ludlow and Shropshire, the Shropshire lad. But in fact, he grew up in Worcestershire. That's where my prep school was. So I identified with him and his poetry. And there was also regional writers at that time. A man called who wrote under the pen name BB, just with inverted commas around the two B's. And so many other things which resonated more with me than anything. That in fact, I no longer spoke any Urdu, which is the language I was born into, and a dialect which we spoke at home. We spoke Kutchi, which is related to Sindhi. We used to speak Kutchi with my grandmother. My mother was already dead when I was 1. And we spoke Urdu to my father, which is strange, but and the national language at the time in Pakistan was Urdu. So I'd forgotten by the time, after 3 years, I was really losing most of my, original languages.
What did your family make of you rejecting Islam?
No, they don't know. Still don't know. My father died while I was at Edinburgh in 1968. And my mother, I never knew. My brother doesn't know I've written all these books.
How could he not?
Well, because of the pen name. That's one of the reasons why I have a pen name, is to protect them. He wouldn't. My brother is a gentle soul. He would not dream of harming me. But I was afraid that relatives might take it out on him. My atheism and my apostasy might blow back on him. And I'm glad I chose a pen name in the end. In fact, one Financial Times, I think it was, journalist suggested I reveal my real name, and then I was okay, I'll do it. And then he said, "Are you sure you really want to do it?" And I thought again about it, and I realized no, it would be just too much. And also, I was married by then. I had 2 children, and I thought it would put their lives in danger.
Why is it that you would put their lives in danger? Why is it that you felt that your brother might be under threat? Is this something that's unique to your family? Is this something that's unique to Islam? There's certainly, I've had Ayan Hirsi Ali, our mutual friend, on the show, famously has a fatwa, Salman Rushdie fatwa. Is it an Islam problem?
It is.
Or is it a more
No, it is
family issue?
Very much an Islam problem, but also a social, I don't know whether it's Islamic social circumstances or there tends to be very little private life in Islamic countries, especially Pakistan. People feel that they have the right to question you about the way you're bringing up your children and so on. In fact, amazingly enough, when I was going through Pakistan, almost exactly to the day, 30 years after I'd left, I was working for a French travel agency called Fram Voyage, and I was taking French tourists to Bangkok, and we had to pass through Karachi. And I took some time off to go and see one of my father's friends. And the first question, he hadn't seen me for 30 years. The very literally first question was, "Your children Muslim?" So are you bringing them up as Muslims? And I already felt threatened. I hadn't written anything by then. This was about 1986. I left Pakistan at 1956, so exactly 30.
And that was a threat, not just a open question. It was like,
No, it felt very much like a threat to me. And then, of course, 3 years later, in '89, you had the famous Rushdie fatwa. There is very little respect for private space in Islam and in Islamic countries, anyway.
Is that a cultural issue, or is that a theological? How much is that tied to the religion itself? Or you could go from country to country, and it's very different norms in different Muslim countries.
It's very much a theological question. You cannot leave your religion. It's a one-way ticket. You cannot leave Islam without being punished for it.
Where are the roots of that? Is that from the Quran? Is that from
it is
Hadith?
Interpretations of various verses in the Quran. I think I mention it in one of my books. It's in the Hadith as well, that apostates must be killed. They must be given a chance to recant, and then after the fourth occasion, then must be put to death. It is definitely there in the Quran. And the theologians like Maududi, who's a Indian who became the spokesman for Pakistan. He was born obviously before partition, and he clearly states, that apostasy is punishable by death. Yeah.
Do you think? I mean, we might be going now a little bit into theology, and I'd love to come back to your story. But is this a fundamentalist Islam issue? Do you separate between Islam and fundamentalist Islam? There are peaceful sects of Islam. Is it pronounced
Ismailis?
Yeah, for example, high-achieving group. If you look at, I look at the Emiratis today as leading the way for a peaceful Islam on a geopolitical on that scale, and there seems to be that is it drastic to paint tar the whole 1 however many billion Muslims with the same brush, or is there separation there? Is there different sides to Islam?
Well, it's a question which is difficult to answer because I don't know. There are various so-called moderate Muslims who will be present on Wednesday when I speak, like Dr. Zudi Jassa, who says he's a moderate Muslim. He doesn't believe in jihad and all the, but
you're speaking, sorry, at Ayan Hirsi Ali's foundation in Washington, D.C.
That's right, on the 15th.
On the topic of?
On defending the West from all her detractors, her enemies, internal and external.
Well, we'll come back to that. But sorry, you were saying about the different Islams and moderate Muslims.
Yes, now, I find that a very useful distinction, which I found in Bernard Lewis, who in fact became a friend. But he makes very little use of it, oddly enough. He just threw it out in one of his prefaces, which is between Islam 1, Islam 2, and Islam 3. Islam 1 is what's in the Quran and the what the theologians developed. Okay, Islam 2 is what's in the Hadith and what the theologians constructed. And Islam 3 is Islamic civilization, what Muslims actually do rather than what they should do. So, for example, until recently, oddly enough, very ironical in a sense, homosexuality was much more tolerated in Islamic countries. And I quote, I forget which one of my books, my first one, I think, Why I'm Not a Muslim. The story told by an anthropologist, a British anthropologist, about how young boys were married off to grown men, and the whole ceremony was very much celebrated in public in a village in Egypt. It was quite open. And then there are stories.
What period is this? What year is it?
1930s. This he was writing in the 1930s.
As recently as the 1930s, that was happening.
Yeah. And there's I quote one story in my book. Compton Mackenzie, who's not much read these days, wrote a story about homosexuality. It must have been one of the earliest novels in English, written in the 1950s, about an English homosexual who went to North Africa, where he found that people were much more tolerant of his lifestyle.
So what changed then? What happened?
Well, this is a new, more fundamentalist strain came into existence, especially with the rise of Khomeini.
So that's from 79, though.
70s.
So you think 1979 is the kind, or the 70s?
I think so, yeah.
It's the change point.
But 79, if you like, yeah.
So not just in the Shia Islamic world, across the entire.
He influenced. His influence went across all these.
How would that be? Because I thought that there was quite a big contention between the Shia and the Sunni. How did his reach go across the Sunni world?
It did, because they found whatever they needed in his fundamentalist interpretation. Sayyid Qutb was a Sunni, but he drew inspiration from Maududi, for example.
Qutb was writing in the 20s. Is that right?
No, he was right. He wrote in the 60s, early 60s. Okay. I think he was executed in 66. I forget now. But he's certainly drew inspiration from whatever, across various boundaries. There's a lot of American analysts got this idea in their head that Sunnis and the Shias never cooperate, that we're okay, we don't need to worry about Khomeini getting together with some regimes in the rest of the Islamic world, and they were proved wrong. And then now I'm not sure what the situation is. I know various intellectuals in the Islamic world were very much impressed with Khomeini and his uncompromising stance on these issues.
So they were impressed by his going back to more fundamental, literal interpretation of Muhammad's and his teachings in the Quran.
Right. Now, to answer your question, you do get some Islam 3, you get Muslims who are moderate, but Islam itself is not moderate. If you like, Islam 1 and 2 are not moderate. Islam 3, people who within Islamic civilization, some of them are moderate, some of them are not fundamentalists. But if you stick to the strict theology, then it is fundamentalist. Mm-hmm. What percentage and so on, I don't know.
Well, I can throw a quick percentage out, which I found very eye-opening, to say the least. This is from about a month ago. The Henry Jackson Society published statistics about British Muslims, and there's about 4 million British Muslims. 76% don't believe there was rape and murder on October 7th in Israel, and a large percent support Hamas. So I'm quite curious, and I've asked previous guests about the moderate Muslims and who represents them. Where are those voices? I had Ed Hussein on the show, and I think he is one of the great moderate Islam voices or moderate Muslim voices, but I'm trying to get a context of how far spread or how widespread his version of Islam is. I wonder if you had insight into that.
No, I find that in my less charitable moments, I find that so-called moderate Muslims are really rather dishonest intellectually. They pretend that the real Islam is tolerant, that the real Islam is pro-women, the real Islam is for freedom of expression. It's just it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense.
Based on the scripture.
Yes, exactly. If you base it on Islam's 1 and 2, it clearly isn't. So, I mean, in a sense, who's been more? I suppose I could be accused of essentialism, saying what Islam is and Islam isn't. It's not up to me to decide. I'm not a Muslim anymore.
So hang on. The moderate Muslims, meaning the so-called peaceful Muslims, the ones who aren't extremists, purportedly aren't extremists, are dishonest because they lie about what Islam is, and therefore they still cannot be trusted. Okay.
Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator.